Welcome to today's live event brought to you by Crayon and Aircall. My name is Connor. I am on the content marketing team here at Crayon, and I will be your host for the next 45 minutes or so. And I am joined by two gentlemen, of course, that you see on your screen here, Chris Pope, who runs strategy here at Crayon, and Tommy Jester, who runs sales at Aircall. Tommy, do you mind introducing yourself to people?
Yeah, definitely. As Connor said, I'm Tommy. I've been at Aircall for almost 6.5 years now. So joined when it was a very small company as the fifth employee in New York, and yeah, I've scaled it all the way up to, I think we're around like 800 people globally now. So have been through a lot here and seen lots of different things with the sales team and just the organization as a whole. So happy to try to impart some wisdom and hopefully have a good conversation with Chris around some of this stuff around competition and deals.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tommy. We appreciate you being here and representing Aircall. Chris, do you mind introducing yourself to the folks?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Chris Pope. Been at Crayon for also 6.5 years, so similar trajectory as Tommy. Actually, was the second sales hire here at Crayon, and then grew into a management role. And then just at the beginning of 2022, I took over our go-to-market strategy. So excited for the conversation today.
Thank you both. We appreciate you being here and very excited to have today's conversation. So today's conversation is all about the 3 reasons your reps are losing competitive deals and the things that you can do to help them win more of those competitive deals. We do have a poll question, very quick, very simple. We ask that you all participate. It'll take 2 seconds. Sheila, if you wouldn't mind saying that live for the folks. So you should all see it on your screen now. I know you all can read yourselves, but I'll read it out. If you ask 10 of my sellers to explain how we differentiate from our competitors, each of them would say the same thing. This is a true or false. So please just let us know if you think this statement is true or false. Again, do you think it's true that your sellers would all say roughly the same thing if they were asked to explain how you differentiate? I'll give folks a few more seconds here to think it over. Gotcha. So thank you to the 53 of you who participated. So it looks like a 30-70 split. Before we move on, Chris or Tommy, do you have a knee-jerk reaction here? Do you either of you surprised or unsurprised by 70% of our participants saying that their sellers would not say the same thing? What do you think, Chris?
I'll hop in here. I'm somewhat surprised. I would say that I think if you look at the total competitive landscape and you look at each competitor, I would think that would be hard to get everybody to say the exact same thing. But across your top tier competitors, I think the expectation should be that mostly everybody is in line with how to compete.
Gotcha. And at their time, were you surprised by that split, or does that seem about right to you?
I think maybe I would expect it to be a little bit closer, maybe 60-40. I think, yeah, in the ideal world that everyone's speaking the same language about their top competitors, but part of it is yeah, each competition, each deal is going to be different, requiring some maybe different talking points. But as Chris said, you're definitely wanting to get everyone speaking the same language and attacking these situations in the same way. So maybe not shocking, but thought it would be a little bit closer, and definitely the goal is to get that flipped. So hopefully we can get into some of those ways that you can do that.
Also, if everybody answered true, that this probably wouldn't be a great topic. I was pleasantly surprised to see the answer.
Yeah, that was impromptu, so that would have been awkward for sure. But it's the perfect segue. So one last thing before we look, I guess 2 things before we get into today's conversation. Quick agenda here. So and these time allocations are totally fluid, so please don't hold me to these. But for about a minute, I'll expand on the poll we just did and talk a little bit about why we're here today. And to Chris's point, I think the results of that poll do tell you a bit about why we're here today. Roughly 15 minutes, we will talk about the 3 mistakes that your reps are making in competitive opportunities where they're selling against one or more competitors. Then from there, once we've talked about sort of the problem, we'll move on to talk about the solution or the solutions. So we'll spend about 15 minutes talking about a few things you can do tactically starting today to help your reps win more competitive opportunities. And like I said, we will break at some points, and Sheila will share any great questions from the audience, but we have set aside some extra time at the end in case there's a bunch of questions that we don't get to, but we will play that by ear. So I will talk for, again, max a minute about why we're here today. Actually, I take that back. I'm not going to talk for a second. I'm just going to flip to the next slide and let you all sort of take it in. So for context here, this data comes from Crayon's 2023 State of Competitive Intelligence report, which is based on a survey of more than 900 people. And we asked each of these people, what percentage of your sales opportunities are competitive? And we looked at the responses specifically from people who work at software companies like Crayon and Aircall. And as you can see, what we found is that for the average B2B software company, 66% of sales opportunities are competitive. So in other words, if one of your reps runs 3 discovery calls this week, at least 2 of those conversations, if not all 3, but at least 2 of those 3 conversations will be with buyers who are having similar conversations with 1 or more of your competitors. And that is why we are here today. As you can see, if your reps aren't equipped to be effective in competitive selling situations, quite a bit of your pipeline is at risk. And we can be frank here. I mean, it always sucks to lose a deal to a competitor, even in the best of times, but especially right now, because I think for most of us, relatively speaking, there are fewer buyers who are raising their hands and saying, yes, I have a need, I have budget, I want to buy a solution like yours. So it hurts, especially right now. Even the best of times, or in the best of times, you lose a deal to a competitor, you can kind of shake it off and say, okay, we've got plenty of opportunities here, we can go win the next one. Can't really say that right now. You need all of these deals, and so do your competitors. So it's super important that your reps are equipped to perform in these opportunities, which of course is why we're here today. So the first step to helping your reps perform better in competitive opportunities is to understand the most common mistakes that reps are making in these situations. So that's what we're going to do right now for, again, about 15 minutes or so. So the first mistake number 1, the number 1 mistake sellers make in competitive opportunities, they talk when they should listen. Chris, I'm going to ask you to elaborate on this a little bit. Can you give us an example of a scenario where you often see sellers doing a whole lot of talking when they should be sitting back and listening to the buyer?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I actually think it's the biggest mistake that a lot of sellers make across the entire sales cycle. But when it comes to competitive specifically, the most common mistake I see is when you're in your groove, right? You're in the middle of discovery, or you're in the middle of a demo, and one of your prospects brings up a feature of your competitors that they like. And the initial reaction that I see a lot of sellers have is to immediately start to spew counterpoints or talk about why their product is stronger, why they have a list of features that can compete with that specific feature the prospect brought up. When in reality, what they should be doing immediately is take a deep breath and then say, thank you for pointing that out, and then start to do deeper discovery around why exactly they find that feature appealing to their specific use case.
And when you say, Chris, before I pass it over to Tommy, is that because you want them to sort of uncover if there's a need that can be solved with something similar that your product does? Is that sort of the reasoning there?
Yeah, I think it does a number of different things. I think the first question I always ask when somebody brings up a competitor feature and we haven't had a previous conversation about competition is, oh, have you used their product before? Oh, have you used that competitor's product before? Because one, that's going to tell you if they have, that's super important for you to know, right? Yeah. Because it completely changes the way that you're going to frame the conversation. If they haven't already used the product, then you're trying to dig deep into why that specific feature is meaningful to them. Did they just see a demo and they think it's a flashy feature, or is it solving a real pain of theirs that you've discussed in the past? Because at the end of the day, again, it's all about shaping the buying vision. And if they have a specific vision based off of FUD that your competitor has already provided them in terms of your product, then you need to work as fast as possible to do discovery to figure out how to reshape that vision.
Gotcha. What do you think, Tommy? Does that sound about right? Do you think about it in the same way?
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, it's probably as Chris said, one of the biggest challenges that we face as sales leaders when competition gets brought up, or really any objection for that matter, is reps just, wanting to dive in and handle that objection head on, or have that conversation right head on like that. But I think it's really important, as Chris said, to really do deeper discovery to understand, what else did they see, with that competitor, that they liked, that they didn't like. And I think asking that question as well is really beneficial during, for the process as well, because you want to understand, right, what they did actually like about what they saw, and also what they didn't like about that, about what they saw with their competitors. So you want to give them that avenue to express both of those, and to continue going down that road of what they did like. And Chris, I think that's a great first question to ask, to understand, have they actually used it in the past. But yeah, again, going deeper and just understanding, why they're looking at them, what was appealing, what they liked, what they didn't like. It's going to give you more information on, just how they're seeing this evaluation process, which is going to allow you to, adapt on the fly, and be able to sell your product the best way possible. But I think, kind of to your follow-up question as well, Connor, of, why do you want to run more discovery? Why do you want to ask more questions? I think it is so that you can, just again, understand the line of thinking that your prospect is going with, and what's ultimately the challenge that they are trying to solve by this feature that they did like. What is it actually going to enable their team to do more of, to do less of? How is that actually going to help them in, the reality of them actually doing their job? Because a lot of the times what I find, at least this happens, very frequently in the telecom world and telephony world, is that there's a lot of different features and phrases and terms and vocabulary words for things, and oftentimes people just have the wrong term, or a different term of how they call something with one competitor versus what we might call it here at Aircall. And so a lot of times there's just a misunderstanding that if you just go in and address that head on, that you may not even understand what they are talking about, when it could be something that we offer, or we could call that something differently or do it a different way. But ultimately what the prospect cares about is solving that challenge that they're looking to solve. So I think it's really important to dive deeper there and really understand what that is that they're trying to do, so that you can start to figure out either other ways around that, or address those things head on, because you'd also rather know them at the beginning of the sales process than at the very end, when you think you're going to win this deal and then you didn't ask the question, and so you're finding out at the last hour that they went another direction because they like something that they saw elsewhere.
Gotcha. Chris, I have an observation, but I bet you have something to add there. So I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, what I would add, and like one of the things that's important to note, is that throughout a sales cycle, your prospect is less likely to give up information the further down the funnel you are within that opportunity. So any opportunity that you have to dig deeper, whether or not it's in talking about competition or their buying vision or anything of that nature, you want to take advantage of that opportunity. And then in addition to that, it's helping you stay in control of the conversation, right? By immediately countering with a question versus spewing whatever is on the battle card in front of you. It's helping you, again, maintain that power dynamic where you also have the ability to ask questions throughout the process. And it's not a one-way relationship where the prospect's constantly asking questions and you're just providing answers throughout the deal.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely the worst meetings that I've seen end up getting into that kind of Q&A section, where prospects just rattling off questions for the sales rep to answer, and it could be very difficult to dig yourself out of that. So yeah, definitely always responding with that question in response to keep control and to keep the conversation on the rails and moving in the right direction is super critical and key.
Cool. So we're going to move on to mistake number 2. But the one thing I want to point out, what I heard in both of your answers, is that as you are, and we're going to talk about, again, tactics and training and enablement in the second half of the conversation, but it sounds like an important thing here is like a mindset shift for your team. if a prospect says, oh, I like this feature that I saw from your competitor, that's a good thing. Like your seller should be excited there because like, oh, what a great opportunity to learn more about my buyer, right? Did I hear that correctly?
Totally. And you actually bring up another good point. I oftentimes help to qualify our team's ops by whether or not they're competitive, right? Because if a prospect's only looking at your solution, then you start to question how serious the evaluation is. If we know pretty early in the process that there's 2, 3, 4 other competitors involved, a prospect's not going to waste their time doing the evaluations of 4 different products unless they were super serious about purchasing something in the long run. So totally. I always tell our reps, if your deal's competitive, we have a real buyer on our hands, most likely.
It's a good thing. Yeah, absolutely agree. So keep that in mind for everyone as we leave here today and you think about enabling your teams. I think that it may seem kind of squishy, but I think that mindset shift can be important. The second mistake that sellers make in competitive opportunities, closely related to the first one. So this is we're going to be fluid with as we talk about these things. They miss opportunities to play offense. Chris, I'm going to ask you again. Would you mind elaborating on this and give us maybe an example of a scenario you've seen where there's a golden opportunity to go on the offensive and sellers miss it?
Yeah, it's a really, really good, really common mistake I see. The best sellers I've ever met almost never have to have calls dedicated to differentiation. But what they're doing is that they're weaving differentiation throughout all of their calls. So the way they're asking questions in discovery, the way that they're demoing the product, the way that they're talking about the value of what they're showing throughout the demo, that's enough differentiation to shape again that buying vision that you're ultimately trying to shape in favor of the product or service that you're selling. So oftentimes, even when I get on a call, depending on what the first question or first couple questions the prospect asks, we typically know where we stand from a competitive perspective because we know how they're thinking about the problem. And again, it's our job to try to reshape that by subtly laying FUD throughout the conversation without ever actually naming the competitors.
What do you think, Tommy?
Yeah, I think that's all very good points. And I think, a lot of the times what people are, coming to the table with and what they want is someone that is almost a consultant in this space that can help them navigate, all the competition, all the features, because, likely most of the buyers you're working with have, maybe bought software before, or they're at least, familiar with software and the SaaS world, and it's very competitive. There's a lot of, fancy features out there, but I think ultimately what they're really looking for is a good experience with, with that rep who really knows what they're talking about within the industry as well. So I think, really taking those opportunities to really establish that credibility like early on in the conversation. And I think sometimes that goes back to that original point, right? Which is that they like something that they saw, or I think just sometimes getting in their own way of trying to tackle things head on rather than just learning, asking questions, and providing good industry insight based on, what they might be seeing or some of the challenges they might be, coming up against, or, based on what they are using today and what you have heard some of the things they're coming to you with, maybe knowing some of the things that other people, that have come to you in these similar situations have, what does that look like for them? What routes have they gone in this, in this part of the process, and what's ended up being very successful, what's maybe not worked out so well, what are some of the common mistakes that you see? And so I think you have that, that ability to speak to the competition, but kind of as you mentioned, Chris, more so in a way where you're speaking a little bit more towards the landscape of, whatever industry you are working within, where you aren't necessarily saying this competitor has this or misses this, but you're really just speaking to who you are as a company and what problems you solve, and some of the challenges that exist out there in the landscape that you see, commonly on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, I think the best ones can do that without really name dropping the competition. But when they know who the competition is, they they know what some of those things to, really like drop and build that credibility, or, have that moment of, yeah, that is something that I am going through right now, and I didn't even have to mention that to this person. I think that really, builds a really good impression for that that prospect. And I think a lot of the times in these first or second calls, they're really, getting an impression of you and the company that you work for, and that's typically going to last, or have a really big impact throughout the sales cycle. So I think those opportunities to really establish yourself as an expert in the space, in the landscape, without, having to disparage or do anything like that, I think is really key.
Yeah, Tommy, I think you brought up a massively important point here, which is there is a such thing of playing too much offense. Throughout my career, I've seen competitors of our own, as well as sellers, spend more time talking about the competition than they spend talking about the problem that the prospect's looking to solve.
Yeah.
And most often than not, that's a huge turnoff for the prospect, right? Because it's showing that you're insecure about your organization's own value. And so you feel like you need to spend time talking more about like your solution and what's wrong with your competitors, and constantly focusing on the competitor versus focusing on the problem.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like outside of just competition and just sales in general, I think what I see happen oftentimes with reps is that kind of what you said, is that they're too focused almost on what their own needs are as a rep versus what are the needs of the customer. So when it comes to something like timeline, right? You ask your reps, hey, like when is this deal, when is this deal closing? A lot of the times what I see is reps are maybe giving what's their ideal timeline for this to close, for their own purposes, versus really having a true compelling event or a contract end date or a migration and implementation plan really thought through and built out that is taking it more from the customer's perspective. And I think, yeah, just as well in terms of like the buying experience, it's certainly not easy these days. Every dollar spent is scrutinized pretty heavily. And so I think they also forget sometimes that, you have a champion that wants to bring your software on and it's going to solve a problem for them, but they need, help in that internal process, selling it to, the finance team, or they need to go through that vendor process. And, it's really your job to make that as easy as possible and as smooth, for them as you can. And if you're not asking the right questions because you're too focused on, what your own needs are, you're going to miss those opportunities to get more information and to really proactively provide, your prospect with what they need to really navigate those waters internally.
For the sake of time, we do need to move on to the third mistake. But before we do, I want to ask a quick follow-up question. So you both made the point, which is correct, that you can play too much offense. But let's say, for the sake of the argument, the prospect says, with the first mistake, we talked about a prospect who had already seen or used the competitor's product. What if a prospect says to one of your reps, hey, I have a demo with this competitor tomorrow or next week? That seems like an opportunity to play offense. So Chris, what do you think? What is a good competitive seller? How do they respond to that piece of knowledge?
The biggest thing that I'll say is the seller has to go into show, don't tell mode in that moment, where if you have 5 minutes at the end of a call and say, hey, like, I know you're speaking to our competitor. Here are 3 things that our competitor won't be capable of that you mentioned are super important to your evaluation, and show them. And then not only show them those, but make sure that you're following up in an email after. What I like when our reps do, what I really love that our reps sometimes do is they'll even send like snippets of them just going over those 3 points. And so the next morning, before that prospect gets on a call with your competitor, they have the opportunity to not only read your email, but be able to watch you walk through it again. I think that's super important that you're showing, not telling in those scenarios. And then also equally as important, you're following up with those like very brief talking points.
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head on that one. It's exactly what we tell our reps to do as well. And especially, all the way down to the email with the follow-up and the snippets and really showing, what is valuable in those moments. And I think also just offering up some suggested questions to ask based on, their situation as you've understood it. Hey, these are the things you've mentioned that are important to you. Here are some things to consider asking them as you go throughout the process, and just kind of placing a few questions that are related to their specific points that they've brought up that might be things that your competitor can or cannot do. And I think it's, again, one of those opportunities to really enable them to have the conversation themselves with your competitor, but doing so with the right information and armed with that right intel of how we do it and what they should be looking out for. I think is gonna still allow them to have the conversation and not you telling them what it is or what to do, but it gives them the opportunity to just ask some questions. And typically if one of those questions gets asked and the answer does kind of come up the way that you thought it would, if you know the competition well, it's going to, again, go back to that point of building credibility as an expert in the space and in the industry. And it's just going to give you more credibility in that, which I think is really important in these deals.
Absolutely is. So we're going to move on to the third mistake that sellers make in competitive opportunities. So say an opportunity where someone has a discovery call, and at the end, the prospect says, "Hey, next week I have a demo with your competitor." Situations like that. The mistake sellers make in these scenarios is they get complacent. One more time, Chris, would you mind elaborating on this a bit and just talk about what complacency looks like in these situations and why it's so costly?
Yeah, I think there's the two biggest things to me is one, you have to teach your reps how to sell in between meetings, right? Not only are those actual conversations that are happening, the discovery call, the demo, the follow-up calls important, but also making sure that your reps know exactly how to leverage the information, the differentiation, messaging, things of that nature that you have at your fingertips in between those meetings. Even at the last two companies that I've been at throughout my career, we always focused on 2-day follow-ups, right? If you have 2 weeks in between your discovery call and your demo, you're not waiting 2 weeks to talk to them again. You're in touch with them every 2 days. And whether or not that's providing them with content that, Connor, you've written, that can be helpful to help, again, shape that buying vision, or whether or not it's dropping competitive material in, whether or not it's connecting them with a customer of yours to speak to, you want to make sure that you're engaging them as much as possible. And I think the reps that I've seen really struggle from a competitive process, they fail to recognize how important that time in between your meetings is.
Yeah, because you don't. I think especially in competitive situations. I mean, time kills deals in general, but in between those calls, you have no idea who your buyer is talking to, what your competitors are saying about your product. So I think it's especially time sensitive. What do you think, Tommy?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that makes sense. I think a lot of it goes to that. I think we've kind of alluded to a lot of points around, not taking maybe prospect at face value, like throughout the sales process. You have to ask those follow-up questions. You have to really understand how deeply they're looking at, another tool, or what, where you also stand within, their kind of rankings. A lot of the times what I'm seeing is that, the internal process is champions sent out there to get a lay of the land and make a recommendation for what they think is the best solution, moving forward. And I think sometimes, reps maybe don't want to ask the direct question or be super direct, but in those situations, again, information is power. And so you need to be asking, hey, you're going and pressing or, recommending a tool internally. Are we the tool that you're recommending? Yes or no? And if not, you want to know that sooner rather than later, so that you can help clear up any misconceptions, or, give yourself a chance to really still have a chance in this deal. Versus just kind of taking it head on that, okay, they've done their due diligence, they're taking it back to their boss and they're presenting it, well, what does that process look like? Have we asked enough questions to really understand that, to really be able to influence it one way or the other, or make sure that they're making the most informed decision, based on how that's running. But another thing that I think goes back to Chris's point of kind of like the in between is, I mean, obviously it's a running joke, in sales around logging information in Salesforce or in your CRM and having that information be accurate as a rep in your database, and managers always hounding about, having that information there. But I think the reason for that is because if you do have, the calls logged and the recordings in your database with the competitive information logged there as well, you're also giving yourself as a rep more opportunity for your manager to, come in and enter that and give you something that maybe you hadn't thought about, or give you another angle on something that, you hadn't really seen it that way or looked at it that way. So, giving your manager the opportunity to really come in and help consult you and give you the best chance of winning that deal. I mean, it goes back to having some of that data in the database accurate and having those calls in there, having the call recordings in there that they can listen to, tagging it with the right competitor that's involved in that deal. I mean, these are things that, through reports and, through the process, you want to give yourself every chance as a rep to be successful in a deal. And, having that stuff be accurate and be logged there is giving, you another opportunity for your manager or, someone else to come in and consult with you or tell you they have a story that could help win that deal or something, along those lines. So I think that's also an important point to note.
Yeah, and to get tactical for a second, because one of the points that Tommy just made is really important, which is the question that I always tell our sellers to ask at the end of every single call is, where are our competitors in your buying process right now? Because you need to either make sure that you're playing on an even playing field, or if you're not, you need to correct that course. So one of the things that always makes me nervous and made me nervous as a seller is if I'm doing discovery when our competitors already met with that organization's stakeholders.
Yeah.
And that brings up another good point is who else inside the org should we be talking to? You always need to be asking that question, because you might have or think you have a champion internally, but your competitor might be talking to your champion's boss's boss, and that might be their champion. And understanding that is also crucial.
Yeah, so I'm hearing there are multiple, complacency isn't just failing to sell between meetings. To your point, Tommy, it's failing to document all the information you're getting so that you can bring in other people to help you. And to your point, Chris, it's getting complacent in terms of thinking you're all good with one champion, and meanwhile your competitor is 9 steps ahead. So I think there's a complacency in competitive opportunities can take a lot of different shapes. So for the sake of time, we do need to move on. I did, for the record, say that the time allocations were super fluid. We're 5 minutes past the 30-minute mark. So to quickly recap this first part of the conversation before we move on to the second one, the 3 mistakes sellers make in competitive opportunities. They talk when they should listen. So probably the most common scenario here is, as we discussed, the prospect says, hey, I really love this feature that your competitor offers. It's super important that your sellers take a deep breath, like Chris said, and recognize that as an opportunity to learn more about their buyer and what's important to them. And they should definitely not be, the wrong way to respond here is just spewing a bunch of information from the battle card. The second mistake they make is they miss opportunities to play offense. Now they can play too much offense, and they shouldn't be, talking more about your competition than they are, listening to the buyer. But if they find out that the prospect or the buyer is gonna meet with the competitor in the coming days, they should be taking that opportunity to highlight, hey, here are the 3 differentiators that will mean the most to you, and following up in email, documenting those with, to Chris's point, snippets. And then the third mistake, which we just talked about, so I don't need to recap it, is that they get complacent. So there you have it, the 3 mistakes your sellers are making in competitive opportunities, the 3 reasons you're losing these competitive opportunities. So now, for the rest of our time together, we are going to talk about some tactics, things you can do starting today to help your reps be more effective when they're selling against the competition. So the first thing is role models. Tommy, would you mind talking a little bit about this, how you define role models and why they are so important when you're trying to enable your sellers to better sell against the competition?
definitely. I think this is kind of a crucial one, right? When we're going back to the team and wanting to change anything, typically there's going to be some change management that comes along with that, which you oftentimes hear that salespeople may not like change and they may put up a fight against it. But I think what's really key in any changes that come down for the sales team is that you want to have your kind of advocates or role models within your own team that can really step up and show the rest of the team that hey, this can be successful because I'm doing it and here's what's working for me. I think like one of the things that we always try to kind of convey is that for the future leaders that are coming up, when things do come up in these meetings and we are introducing new things, we really need their buy-in in advance to help kind of pitch that to the rest of the team. So we want to have their public support on these things, and that goes to really making sure they're prepared, they're clued into some of the changes that are coming, and prepared to really be able to help you with that kind of narrative within those meetings. But at the end of the day, sellers are very competitive as well. So I think once one rep sees that this top rep is having success and out earning their comp plan and finding new ways to do that and finding new strategies to do that, oftentimes you're going to see kind of that trickle down effect there. The reps start asking, how is that person doing it? And they start investigating it themselves, and they really have that buy-in to start doing what they're doing because they see that it's working firsthand for another rep and that they're actually, making some good money doing it. So I think having those people within the team that you can really rely on and trust to take on these kind of initiatives, it's also a really good opportunity for those future leaders that want more responsibility and want to be tasked with more within the team. These are good avenues for them to start to build up new skill sets and develop themselves as leaders or as expert reps within the company and within the space. And so I think they're always craving that extra development, and this is a really great way that you can give that to them and help them build up that strength and that arm, while also benefiting everyone on the team.
Chris, before I go to you, I do want to just highlight something Tommy mentioned, which is that whether it's in the form of rolling out your first battle card or a series of trainings on competitive selling, this is a change. And to Tommy's point, change management is hard. So Tommy, I think what you said, I want to confirm, before you announce this change, before you announce to your team, hey, we're going to start using battle cards, hey, we're going to do this series of trainings on competitive selling, before you make that announcement, you should already have your role models in lockstep ready to sort of evangelize that change. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, definitely. Like we actually have something called train the trainer, which is kind of like what we coin it as internally, where that's really the goal, is to train your champion or your enablement rep to go out there and do it, and to understand how to train the rest of the team so that they can actually run the training themselves, or they can run that meeting and they can get other people bought in. And so again, just another avenue that they can really have for their own growth and development as well.
Gotcha. Chris, what do you think? Can you talk a little bit about the role that role models play in making your team more effective in these competitive situations?
Yeah, I think working in the competitive intelligence space directly for the last 6 years, I think there's two concepts that I've seen be really successful within our client accounts. It's one, having what a lot of people call an alpha team, right? So competitive selling is going to be it's a team sport, and it's ever evolving. Your competitors are never just going to be sitting there static. So assembling a team of individuals across sales, across retention, across product, and having them meet on a semi-regular basis. A lot of our clients do it on a monthly basis, and just having a conversation around how is the market evolving, how are our competitors adjusting their messaging, and getting those members of that alpha team to also be advocates for the program and push the program is super important. The second thing that Tommy brought up that I think is important for especially newer revenue team members to know within an organization is who's the best against the competition. So again, what a lot of our top clients do, and what a lot of the top CI programs do that I've seen, is they'll actually have this concept of a leaderboard live directly on the battle card. A lot of newer reps are going to be really nervous to just start randomly reaching out to different people across the organization, asking them, oh, who's the best selling against X company? So having that publicly facing on the battle card so they can quickly go and say, oh, Tommy is the best selling against X competitor. I should reach out to Tommy to see if he can help in this opportunity is super important. And it also, again, it gamifies things a little bit, right? Every seller wants to be on top of leaderboards. So making sure that people understand who's the top dog against the competition is important. And it's another way to advocate for your program.
So it's super important to first, with the help of a leaderboard, identify who's the best at selling against the competition. But then you have to show everyone what makes them so good at it. You know, what are they saying when a prospect mentions a feature of a competitor that they love? Or what are they saying when a prospect says, I have a demo with this competitor next week? So the second thing you need to enable your sellers to be better in competitive opportunities, you need a library of exemplary call recordings. So Chris, you were kind of on a roll there. So can you talk about how sort of call recordings are related to the role model thing and the role that they play in leveling up a competitive selling skills?
I'm a huge advocate for leveraging some sort of call recording software within your competitive process and within your competitive enablement process. So whatever you're using, it doesn't really matter, but having calls or snippets that show really good examples of different competitive scenarios is important. So we actually have a library dedicated to different stages of the funnel. So if our reps want to know how to talk about the competition and weave that throughout a really strong competitive discovery call, they have call recordings that can do that. Competitive negotiation is huge, right? That you could win the deal technically, but if your competitor knows how to position their pricing model and their strategy around that to help turn the table at the end of the deal, it's really hard to win that back. So again, I think it's all about identifying what are the key scenarios where you need these call recordings and having those, again, publicly facing, really easy to find, whether or not it's on the battle card or somewhere else that you're hosting competitive information.
Gotcha. Thanks, Chris. What would you add there, Tommy?
Yeah, definitely. I think, within those recordings, I think as we alluded to earlier, you want to make sure that they are just as a baseline, back in your database and in whatever software you're using to help analyze those or pick up on sentiment and trends and things of that nature. So definitely very important there. Internally, yeah, I think having those within the database is great, but using tags on them as well to help understand what was that call in regards to? Was it negotiation? Was it a competitive deal? Which competitor was involved with that? So again, creating those tags that you can label on those calls so that you can have a better library, not only for handling these in the future or handling them as they come up, but also handling them in the future, right? I think a big part of our onboarding, in sales today is heavy on libraries of good examples and bad examples of, how a negotiation was handled or how this competitive deal was handled. And so I think, they can be utilized not only in the moment, but they can be further utilized in the future to help train new reps on the team and get them up to speed. And yeah, I think just, sharing those recordings, being able to tag your manager in them, with a quick note of, hey, I didn't feel great about this point of the conversation. Can you give it a listen and let me know what you think? Or, sometimes even going beyond the recording itself and, either the manager being on those calls to be able to coach or having the ability to maybe, listen in some capacity without being kind of live on that call as well. I think those are also, really important avenues to explore, when it comes to this particular topic and really, tackling these pretty head on, because I think, one of the things that I've seen work really well when it comes to coaching of reps is that sometimes if a week goes by, it's a little bit too late and they've already moved on from that situation or that deal in their head. And so sometimes that in the moment proactiveness and coaching can really stick with that rep, for the next time that they're in that scenario. So I think those are some things to look out for.
Gotcha. So before we move on to the third need and then get to Q&A, two things I want to point out for the audience here. So tactically, when you're creating your library of call recordings, there should be at least two filters, it sounds like, to organize. So Chris, you mentioned organizing by deal stage. Tommy, you mentioned organizing by competitor, and by what was the other tag you mentioned?
Yeah, I think I was mentioning like or the deal stage as well, similar to
Gotcha.
Chris.
Okay, so just making it super easy for your reps to go through on their own, sort of self-serve. Oh, I'm at this stage of this competitor. Perfect. Here's the call recording I need to watch. So that was the first thing, and I forgot the second thing. So we're gonna move on to the third thing you need to enable your reps to win competitive deals: office hours, or more generally, peer-to-peer learning. Chris, can you talk a little bit about this one and the role that it plays in competitive selling?
Yeah, so I think this is, again, super important. I think they come in two different forms. So the first is call reviews. So making sure that not only are you providing a place where sellers can go find exemplary call recordings, but also periodically taking time to actually review those calls live with a bigger group or within specific teams, I think is super important, right? Because not only is that providing one, it's reminding them where those call recordings live, but two, it's opening up the dialogue around this is why this competitive differentiation worked within this specific scenario, or this is why you asked this type of question in this specific situation. The second is holding regular office hours where sellers can show up and just ask whatever questions they currently have. I think is also super important. It's providing somewhat of a safe space, right? Maybe they don't want to ask the question in front of the entire sales team, or maybe they don't want to comment on the battle card asking that specific question, but providing a space where they can come and have an open dialogue around the competition and how you're changing messaging, I think is super important.
Yeah, one of the things you touched on, Chris, that I want to highlight, and I'm not going to forget this one. Part of the point here is if you just give your reps, even if it's the greatest call recording library in the world, you can't assume that they're going to watch something and know why it's good, right? So you're talking about by watching these calls in a group setting, if someone doesn't understand, hey, I don't really get why that response was good, there's an opportunity there, to your point, Tommy, in the moment before they forget about that, to let them know right away, hey, here's why this is a good example of what you should do. So just want to clarify that that's why call recordings on their own aren't enough. You need to have that in a self-serve capacity, but then also, like Chris said, periodically get the team together as a group and do like a sports team, like do like a film review. What do you think, Tommy? Anything to add there?
I think it's just further elaborating on those 2 points because it's kind of the same for us over here. I mean, we have a once a week calling session where, our reps will come to the table with examples of either things they thought they did well or things they thought, they could do better, or pieces that they weren't quite sure how to handle this. So they wanted to get the take of the team as a whole. And I think what's super beneficial in those sessions when you have the group as well is that you can tackle those snippets and also start to formalize it across the team, but also get it into their own words. So in those areas where we find a really good piece that someone said that we want to kind of use that again and replicate that in all of our deals in the future, what we'll start to do is start to actually write out that script for all of the reps, but we'll walk through it and train through it a bit so that we can get it in their own words so that it feels natural to them. It feels, like it's coming out the right way in their own words. And so it's a good way to, put something into action rather quickly in a way that, is going to be the same across the team, but also unique to that individual and their personality, and to get that out. So definitely the coaching sessions are huge when it comes to, those pieces, but also just from a general office hours standpoint. I mean, I feel like I benefited from office hours. I know, like, back to my like university and college days, I was a big proponent of it, of going in and getting the help I needed at my own pace. And I think that's really important for your reps as well, right? If you can have the availability to just be there for them at their own pace with their own questions and what they need to come with, as you said, maybe they're not comfortable bringing it up in a group setting, or maybe, they don't want to wait 2 weeks for your scheduled one-on-one, or, their manager one-on-one isn't until, Thursday, and they have a question now. I think, what I always tried to do is keep that last week of the month or the quarter, kind of open that up to have a couple hours each day where I'm available for questions or anything that you might need, just to get, a second set of eyes or a second opinion on something. Like, I'll be there, and you can pop in and pop out as you need to get, your stuff done. But I think the reps really appreciate that availability. And I think it does go a long way to actually, help get things across the finish line, help move things more efficiently. So I definitely think that, yeah, that piece is super important. I mean, yeah, we're very busy. And so I think sometimes we lose sight of just the availability aspect for the team, and just being there to answer, questions on a little bit more on their terms, versus, the other way around.
Yeah, the last piece I would just jump in and say there too is from the CI professional or from the product marketing professional's perspective that's responsible for doing CI. The office hours allow you to collect a lot of sales field intelligence, so like information that they're hearing out in the field, but it also stops you from constantly having to answer one-off questions, right? So when you're getting like one-off questions from a bunch of different people across the revenue team, holding those office hours helps set the expectation that, hey, if you do have questions, like, I'm not going to ignore your one-off questions, but I will add your questions to our office hours so we can discuss them as a team. And I'm not just providing a valuable answer to one person when it could be a valuable answer to the entire revenue organization.
That's a great thing to add, Chris. So we got a few more minutes. I want to make sure that we have time for any questions that came in. But real quick, just to recap the second half of the conversation, I want to put it that role models kind of play a role throughout all of these things, right? They are, like Tommy said a few minutes ago, they are ready once you're about to announce the change, you're announcing this new focus on competitive selling, they're ready to go. They are featured in your call recordings, they are socializing the call recordings, they're maybe helping more junior reps in the comment section, commenting on calls, pointing out what was good, maybe what they need to work on. And maybe they're even the ones who are organizing the office hours, and maybe they're stepping up. If folks are nervous to play a call of theirs during office hours, maybe a role model will lead by example and volunteer one of their own calls, whether it's one where they did a lot of good things or one where they made some mistakes. So role models they play an absolutely integral role in all of these tactics that we're discussing here. So Chris and Tommy, thank you both so much for spending this time with us. I'll leave this up here as we're spending our last few minutes on Q&A. So here at Crayon, like I mentioned, we have our State of Competitive Intelligence report, which you can find on our website. And Aircall collaborated with a little company called HubSpot on a fantastic similar report called the 2023 Sales Trends Report. I've read it myself a couple of times. Our own CRO is featured a few times. So definitely go to aircall.io and check out that report as well. Sheila, with our last few minutes here, any questions from the audience that you want to lob to Chris and Tommy?
Yeah, there's one here that's like a little more tactical when we were just talking about office hours. Are you holding those as the manager or like sales executive, maybe these like role models involved? Chris, how have you handled those?
Yeah, really good question. I think it's going to depend on the size of your revenue organization. I think if you have a few hundred sellers, then yeah, you're going to need to break that out into groups or segments. What I've seen be most successful is break it out into teams. And then typically on a quarterly basis, you might be holding one that includes the entire revenue organization. So teams can start to hear about how other teams are thinking about things. But if you're going to hold regular office hours, I would try to keep the group like somewhere between 10 to 15 individuals max.
So that people can learn from each other. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And this is the question, we've talked a lot about competition, related to other companies, but we had a question come in about sort of in-house solutions, and maybe there's some tactical advice that you guys can share about that. So best practices for how to compete against an in-house solution, not necessarily tech they built themselves, but instead a combination of tools to accomplish the goals that sort of our all-in-one solution can offer. So Chris, I'll throw it to you. Are there any maybe talk tracks that work well in this type of situation, in this type of competitive situation?
Yeah, I think everybody's biggest competitor in a lot of situations is do it yourself. I think there's two things that are super important for your organization to figure out is you obviously built the product for a reason. So what is the ROI that your solution is providing that makes it worth them getting off the sidelines? And then you need to have really great examples of other organizations that have been in a similar position to that organization. So one, it's social proof or the ability to point to other similar clients that have done exactly what they've done to move off the sidelines and stop doing it themselves and use your solution instead. And you really need to have ROI that's tangible and realistic for that individual as well.
Anything to add there, Tommy?
Yeah, I think the ROI piece is huge, especially now, right? I think everyone seemingly in the world is looking at productivity and efficiency and saying, how can we maybe do more with less? And so I think people probably are looking at the systems that they have and saying, okay, maybe we've done it this way for a while, but could we do it more efficiently if we made a minor change or if we made a change? And so I think that, that ROI piece definitely is a big one. If you can offer a solution to that the productivity and efficiency piece, I think that's really gonna strike a chord in today's world, because that's what a lot of these teams are really setting out to look for. So I think it's something that seemingly everyone is vetting out and looking for at this time. So I think leaning into that a little bit and trying to show how you might be able to do that.
Customer stories definitely could have been the need number 4. They play a huge role in all sales opportunities, but competitive ones for sure. We have, I think, 9. Not even. Any last questions, Sheila?
I think we're good. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining. Chris and Tommy, thank you both so much for dedicating an hour of your day to enlighten all of us with your experience. We really appreciate it. And again, go to Crayon.co to check out the State of CI report. Go to Aircall.io to get the sales trends report. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.